Hey everyone, I'm rather incoherent. The Feast of Hemlock Vale is finally getting spoiled. I wanted to go over my initial impressions of the card so far. This roundup was done by Darby K of HNevils.com, and let's get started. Let's get right into it. I'm going to go over the partial spoilers of these investigators very quickly because we don't fully know what they are. Wilson Richard is 3s across the board. You always hate to see the Jenny stat line. You can tell that he has something to do with tools, and you get +1 skill test on tools. That's rough, because yes, there are weapons that are tools. Presumably he'll have access to them. He'll have some Kaimani-esque thing. So he'll have access to like a fire axe. I hope he has access like fire axe, fire extinguisher. He has access to sledgehammer already. But even with that +1 on that limited selection of weapons, that's not getting him very high. It's just base 4. There's too much covered up for me to guess what his effect is. His deck building matters tremendously. But on the whole, I have 2 opinions about this. First, an overwhelming opinion at my table. Can you just make some fighters that fight, please? It's been a weirdly long amount of time since you printed a fighter that liked to kill people. I know that Sister Mary is technically a fighter, not that she's great at it with her base 3 fist, and I know that Lily Chin is a fighter, but she's not even properly a guardian, and additionally she can't use guns, which is really mucking up the guardian identity. It's been such a long time since we just like printed a dude who was good at guns, and our table really misses that. Additionally, I mostly look at Wilson Richards and think, yes, Kaimani's climbing his way up the tier list. If they're printing a tool guy, Kaimani gets all the tools they print for him, Kaimani's getting the buff they need. So that makes me happy. With Kate Winthrop, we need to talk about the Flux Stabilizer, and I don't want to talk about the Flux Stabilizer. But here we are, so let's talk about the Flux Stabilizer. With Kate Winthrop, you can see we're 2-4-2-4. We are very similar to Men and Ursula Downs in our stat lines, and since the Seekers already had all the most broken stat lines get printed, they have to print the bad stat lines. Now, they can't print any more 5-book investigators. They can't print anyone with 1 fist and optimal defensive mythos stats. They gotta print reasonable stuff like this, and I love to see it. Now, you begin with an inactive Flux Stabilizer, and you can move a clue from yourself to it to activate it. I don't know if there will be any other science or tool assets, presumably there will be, that are meant to work with this effect. And then you have the forced effect where if those assets were to leave play, the clue is not going to actually leave the game. You won't soft lock yourself. Her star is that you may move 1 clue from an asset you control back to Kate Winthrop. So I assume that will be essentially throughput, get your clues back eventually. Anyway, getting on to the Flux Stabilizer in its inactive state, once you get it activated, you search your bonded cards or discard pile for one of the 2 variants of Etheric Current and shuffle it into your deck. Then you flip Flux Stabilizer into active. You keep the clue on it, and here you have the reaction. When you place a clue on an asset you control, get +2 skill value for your next test this phase. So now you're moving the clues and getting +2. You also have the failed experiment weakness. We'll cover that in a second. Let's get down to the Etheric Currents. You have the variants for Yuggoth and Yoth. I assume there's only 2 variants, but we don't actually know that yet, and with the name so far, there's basically, you know, a shitload. There are so many different places these could lead to. You can just immediately look at all the Archive of Conduits destinations, and all of them appear to be valid answers to this as well. So there could be more than just these 2. As for what we're seeing so far, these are both 0-cost events that commit for 1 icon, and you probably would never commit them for that icon. We have a fighting event where you get all your clues back from your assets. You use book instead of fist. If you succeed against a non-elite enemy, you exhaust it and move it, and you draw a card. Then you flip your Flux Stabilizer back over to the inactive side. Then for the Yoth variant, it's the same except book instead of foot for evasion. If you succeed, you shuffle it into the encounter deck entirely, draw the card, flip it back over. These feel like your signature thing is non-elite enemy management. I don't feel great about these cards so far. I think there's probably going to be a head and book win, however. I think there's going to be 4. I could be wrong, that's just the vibe I get from this. If there are 4, the other 2 will have a very big impact since you're picking which one you're using. The fact that it shuffles in your deck is pretty lame, but you're a Seeker, so you'll find it within the next 3 turns. It won't be a problem. Anyway, getting into the failed experiment, test 3 head, +1 difficulty for all the assets with clues, so this will probably be a 4 every time, right? Then for each point you fail by, you take 1 horror or place 1 of your clues on your location. Ugh. Your weakness is basically Rotting Remains, and you have 2 head. No, because it's gonna be a 4 difficulty test, it's worse. Or you drop all your clues. That's a pretty bad weakness. That's actually, I've made a huge mistake as appropriate. That feels bad. Like, not the worst of the worst. Wendy will probably be holding on to that for a long time. There are some really vicious weaknesses. But failed experiments pretty bad, right? It does not feel like Kate's super well equipped to deal with Failed Experiment. And I guess my overall opinion of what I've seen of Kate so far, her deck building is so important. You can't really judge a character until you know their deck building. If Kate is just straight up Seeker 5, Rogue 2, congratulations, Kate, you're going to be a lot better than I currently think you are. I'm assuming she has some other weird deck building, though. Her 4-foot might actually imply she's going to be Rogue 2. Anyway, as it stands currently without knowing her deck building, I think her signature, from what we've seen currently without knowing if there are other etheric currents, I don't jive super hard with this. You eventually get your clues back, but there are a lot of scenarios where your clues are on a tight budget and you're not able to really do this. It just feels very jank. You're not getting a whole lot for being this character, it feels like. I feel like you get so little from this character that I think I'm missing something. I just don't see it. And then getting into the 6 new cards for the Seekers, we have the Chemistry set. It is a 2-cost accessory slot. Action, exhaust it to investigate. If you fail by exactly 2, discard it. Succeed by 0, gain 2. Succeed by exactly 2, draw 1. Succeed by exactly 4, discover 1 additional clue. My opinion of this is that Seeker is a class where we keep printing them good cards, but they've already got such crazy shit that we don't run them. This is a good example of that. Since you're trying to be up by 2, a whole lot of the time you'll pass by 2 on a 0 or a skull that did nothing, or you'll pass by 0 because you got the -2 you were expecting. This will pretty reliably get you several resources and cards per game, I think. However, it doesn't get you cards or resources immediately reliably when you play it. You want your draw to happen now, your resources to happen now. You're not going to cut Crack the Case and Burning the Midnight Oil for this thing, right? You're not going to cut Deep Knowledge for this thing. So it feels like the point of this card is vastly outperformed by other cards you already have access to, who aren't just better at doing the job, but are also actually reliably doing the job. I looked at Dr. Charles West and I was so thrilled for a moment when I first read him. 3-cost asset ally, 1 health, 2 horror, additional hand slot to hold a tool asset, and then reaction after you successfully investigate by exactly 1 or 3, exhaust and to deal a damage enemy at your location. I don't even care about that. That's just like a weird trend of these new things that I don't like that ability. Are you really trying to deal with, like, what, rats by investing? I don't understand. This feels like just a ribbon. This is nothing. However, an ally that gives you a hand slot sounds really cool. And then I remember we're talking about Seekers, and I'm not cutting Milan for a hand slot. What am I going to do? Hold a Hawkeye folding camera? That's just Milan that doesn't make money. And I think about like buying Charisma for Charles West, and I'm like, I could have bought it for so many other things. Lab Assistant, Art Student, and Mr. Rook for Expendable Soak with immediate value. There's so many things you can do that aren't Charles West. And isn't that just the story of Seeker cards? Because let's take a look at Microscope. By all accounts, a good card. 2-cost hand asset reaction. After an enemy at your location is successfully evaded or defeated, exhaust Microscope, put a resource on it as evidence, eat your heart out, Trish. Double action investigate, get +1 for each evidence, max +3. If you succeed, you may spend up to 2 evidence to discover that many additional clues at your location. The thing is, because you're capped out at spending 2 evidence, you spend a double action investigate for 3 clues. That's not bad, obviously. No one's out here legitimately claiming that Seekers are reliably getting 2 clues per action. 1.5, especially for a 0 experience card, is absolutely great, but you do have to go through the rigmarole of getting the resources on this by evading enemies. And, like, man, Magnifying Glass is just a really good card, isn't it? That card's just ridiculous. Seekers, man, Seekers are just wild. So I like Microscope. But if you're looking at it as an evidence card, I don't think it's better than Hawkeye Folding Camera if you're not going Clue Dropper and you're just talking about Daryl. If you're talking about going Clue Dropper and that's why you care about evidence, then I think that you're better off looking at, what's it called, research notes for obvious reasons. I don't think Microscope notes. I don't think Microscope outperforms any of the Seeker hand assets. It's a really high competition slot. It's hard to break into. Ravenous Mycodon is our new unidentified card. It is a 2-cost asset. It's 1/1 soak without a slot. That's already solid, right? Like, it's not good. No one's running Leather Coat just because soak is good, and that's a fast card in Rogue, which is a generally weaker class than Seeker, because everything is a generally weaker class than Seeker. But I will say that just like as a baseline, the fact that this is slot to soak does have value. And the way this one works, the way you identify it, is you spend an action to get the uncanny growth, and once you get 3 growths on this, you record you've identified it. The way you get the growths is by using this 1 cost event, and after you do your investigate test, you add growths equal to how much you succeeded by. So odds are you spend 1 action, do 1 test, and you finish it. If you get unlucky, as is so often the case when autofail meets the dream diary, it'll take you more actions. This is not that bad to discover, to identify them. This is pretty solid, but how good it is will be determined entirely by something we haven't seen yet, because why bother identifying it if you don't want what it does, and we don't know that yet. But in terms of identifying it, not hard at all, doesn't take up slots. I do wonder if this will maybe take up an ally slot once you've identified it though. We'll learn more about it later, but so far, there is nothing bad about this at all. Cheap cost, free soak, easy identify, definitely has the potential to be good. And lastly, we have the skill well funded. It is not practiced, thank God for that. When you control a science or tool asset, it gains a second question mark. While you control 3 or more of those, it gains 2 more question marks, going up to 3. It's not bad. If there were a tool-based deck, you would probably run this. Wait, no. This is only a little bit better than Unexpected Courage once you have fully set up. Just run Unexpected Courage. I guess realistically, in a tool deck, you would have a tool out immediately. There'd be no reason not to run this over Unexpected Courage. But the fact that it's so close to it, and again, Endseeker, that's the problem, right? We're talking about a class that can use practice makes perfect on deduction. Marginally better than Unexpected Courage is not what we're looking for. But it's not bad. Next up, we have the teaser for the new Rogue, and there's nothing not to like with what I see so far. 3424 for a Rogue is an excellent stat line. Actually, that is a 13-point stat line. Well, no wonder it's a good stat line. They gave him an extra point to waste on 2 Fist. You know, when Guardians and Seekers got 13-point characters, they had 5 in Book and 5 in Fist. But yeah, sure. It makes sense. It's a Rogue. Why would they have a good stat line even with 13 points? Do all the other 13-point characters have 5 and something? Because Rita has 5 foot, and I think she's 13 points. I don't know if there's a 13-point Mystic. I, as a unfortunate Rogue man, am not a fan of this. I feel personally insulted by the fact that this character has 13 stat points and would prefer to see my head reduced to 2 just so that I don't have to be mad. But then it would be Trish. Oh, that's why you have 13 points. If they gave her 2 head, it would just be Trish, so they had to give her an extra stat point. I see what you're doing. Anyway, she gets an extra action to take parlay actions, and there are a decent number of cards that get parlay actions. There'll be more that support this idea. So that's just a free action a turn. How good it is remains to be seen, but that's a potentially very strong ability. Her star effect is a number. It doesn't matter as long we just assume we're passing at 0, so the positive number doesn't matter. The important part is the text. If you succeed, choose a non-elite enemy at your location or a revealed connecting location, automatically evade that enemy. Like, yeah, there'll be the 1 in 100 stars where that saves the game. But realistically, that is a completely unpredictable, largely useless ability. I don't think I care about that at all. But 7/7 Soak is good. Like, the actual stats here and the ability, especially for a Rogue, those are fantastic. Rogues get robbed all the time on this. I'm actually very optimistic about Alessandra. And then we have I'll Pay You Back, one of the many super effective griefing tools. 0 cost Rogue event, fast play during your turn, choose another investigator at your location, move all resources from them to you. At the end of the round, move all resources from you to them. I'm not running Teamwork. I'm not running Charles Ross Esquire, and I'm not running this. But it is very funny, I'll give it that. And I do admittedly approve of every single green card they print that cannot be used by a big money character, so that's also nice. And lastly, we have the stat line for our new Mystic: 4 head, 4 book, 3 fist, 1 foot. I'm completely fine with that stat line. I'm never thrilled to see a 4-head Mystic, but we're missing so much information that I can't say anything about this. Like, that's just the character. I have no opinion on that whatsoever. It's finally time to talk about Hank Sampson and ask the most important question of the day. Namely, what the actual fuck? Why does Hank exist? How is this okay? I'm not mad because I enjoy powerful things and I'll just not play with them once I start finding them boring, but TLDR, 10/10 Soak, 5 Fist, that's about to go up to 6 Fist. Let's read the character. He's got 3-1-5-3 as his stat line. Literally perfect stat line. The only way to improve this is a side grade where you become 4-2 split on your Mythos defense stats. But this is actually better, I would say, for a Survivor because they have a bunch of things that buff up those stats and some new ones getting printed that are better than all the old ones. We'll get to that in a second. Anyway, his ability is that he is Tetsuo Mori and Brother Xavier, all of that stuff. You may assign any damage or horror dealt to ally assets or other investigators at your location to you. Reaction, when you would be defeated by damage and or horror, instead heal all of your damage and horror and swap this card with its bonded resolute version either side face up. So you have 5/5 initial soak and then you die. Only Hank isn't done. Now there are 2 variants of Hank, your stat line's gonna change. You can go down from 5 fists to 4 and get 3 book, and there will be niche cases where this makes sense to do. Or you can gain a fist and a head. So I'm gonna pick that one. You know, the one where I'm more resistant to the mythos and better at my job, because I'm clearly the fighter. I'm not making a character designed to get clues with 3 book after I take 5 damage or horror. That feels horribly unreliable. We're always picking the one on the left, right? So I gain 1 head, 1 fist. I come back with 6/4 soak, totaling 11/9 soak, with the first 6 statted character, starting with great stats with good mythos resilience. You can't be healed anymore. Considering that you're a survivor with good mythos resilience, you have 6/4 health left, which is as much as people like Charlie Kane start with. You've already taken a good chunk of damage, so like, I know you were voluntarily taking it, but still, that's damage that's already happened. It's not at risk anymore. You've gotten through that hump. Like, not being able to be healed when soak exists, it just doesn't matter. It just doesn't matter. It's so weird. Like, you do stop being Tetsuo Mori, but you're a godless killing machine. Anyway, at this point, you get the reaction. When 1 or more damage is placed on you, gain 2 resource. I didn't know that part was written on him. That's just funny. That's just hilarious. Why? Sure, why not? Fuck it. Anyway, his star goes from blank to move 1 damage from Hank to an asset you control. That doesn't really matter. That's not the biggest deal. I thought it was going to say an enemy, and I was almost upset. Coming down to his signatures, we haven't gotten around to his deck building yet. He has a 2-cost event for his signature, and it's a fast event that you play when you engage a non-elite enemy. You can move up to 2 damage and or horror from Hank Sampson to that enemy as damage. That's actually very, very strong, especially in your second phase when you can't be healed. And no, it doesn't work on elite enemies. It's not a skill like, not Shell Shocked. The home front is for Mark Harrigan. It is a actual, like if you're committing it for these icons, you're not dealing the damage as well. You have to spend the resources and then deal the damage, and it doesn't work on bosses. There's a lot of downsides compared to similar signatures, but it's still a way of healing yourself. It's still a way of dealing with enemies without rolling to hits. It's still a way of dealing damage without spending an action, and very frequently you find yourself dealing with the elite boss, yes, but then a random deep one spawns in and you have to kill him too, and this is fast, deal 2 damage for that situation, which is great. It's hard to fully evaluate Where's Pa because it has a new keyword on it. We assume this is just inverse Hunter and the enemy runs away each turn now. But what it does is Revelation, discard cards from the top of the encounter deck until an enemy's discarded, attach Where's Pa to that enemy, and spawn it at a connecting location if able. Attached enemy gains Elusive, which again, we think means it runs away from you at the end of each turn, the opposite of Hunter. And of course, at the end of the round, Hank Sampson takes 1 direct order. So my opinion of this is that it's not the scariest weakness in the game. It is a good weakness to give for a character that might be unhealable with 4 Horror Soak and otherwise an unstoppable Juggernaut, but very frequently you'll just walk over and kill it. Very frequently you'll take the horror and be like, oh, that's all right, I'm stout-hearted, it's not a big deal. Like, I enjoy this, I think it's good. It's a way better execution on the idea of finding Izzy, Jenny's weakness, but it's not super harsh. It's not soft, but it's not super harsh, it'll be fine. And lastly, we have the Survivor cards. I'm going to start with the Sparrow Mask because it is just absolutely nuts. First of all, there's a mask slot now. Well, not a slot, it's a limit 1 per investigate. It doesn't matter, it's a mask slot now. I'm looking forward to seeing the new ones. I'm sure there'll be exactly 1, maybe 2 more before we never touch it again. It'll be deeply confusing, but it's a 1-cost, effectively slotless asset as far as the game is concerned now. It gets 2 offerings, and you get the offering back anytime you take 1 or more damage and or horror. You spend an offering to get +2 head or foot for the skill test, limit once per test. So about the insane mythos resilience in these stats and how you're intentionally taking damage and horror, this feels really easy to push to 5/5 in a character that has access to Lucky. This just feels like borderline mythos immune at level 0. This feels nuts. Sparrow Mask feels very, very strong to me in Hank, and probably in many other characters, but especially in Hank. Pitchfork is a really well-designed thematic execution on an idea. I think it's slightly better than level 0 Sledgehammer. It's a 3-cost 2-handed asset. Item, tool, weapon, and melee. Fight, you get +1 fist and deal +2 damage for this attack. If it's successful, you lose control of the Pitchfork. It's attached to your location, and it gains. Action, take control of Pitchfork. Anyone may use it. I don't think you want other people taking the fighter's weapon. That's probably not a thing you want them to do. But the point is, you spend an action, you throw it at +1 fist for 3 damage, you spend another action, you pick it up. So effectively, 2 actions, swing for 3 damage. That's basically Sledgehammer. Wait, is that exactly Sledgehammer? Oh, I just misremembered Sledgehammer. This is just worse Sledgehammer. Well, that makes me deeply sad. I feel like I'm missing something. Why is Pitchfork in any way better than Sledgehammer? Sledgehammer has an alternative attack if you have huge melee stats. It gets +2 and +2 for its double action. Because you can use just the fight action and pick it up later, is that the way it's better? It's the only way it's better. I'm gonna be honest. As the fighter, the idea that I end my turn without a weapon, planning to pick a weapon out next turn, stresses me out. I don't like that at all. I'm like, oh cool, I hope I don't draw an enemy and get opportunity attacked. Then I can pick up my pitchfork, engage an enemy off my clover, and then throw it at the guy, and that'll be my whole turn, and I won't do anything else. The idea of picking up this pitchfork at the start of my turn doesn't feel safe. It's not terrible, just like, why would I pick this over Sledgehammer? And I'm not always gonna be like, oh yeah, but Machete's better, even though I do that every single time we talk about a secret card. And like, it stands out to me that this card is almost identical to Sledgehammer. They're both weapon melee tool items. Yeah, they have the exact same set of tags. They're so obviously similar that it's kind of jarring. Next, we have the 2-cost event Push to the Limit. I always like seeing more recursion for survivors. In this case, you choose a weapon or tool asset in your discard pile, resolve an action ability on it, ignoring all costs, including the action cost, and then after this effect resolves, you shuffle it into your deck. Playing this card does not provoke attacks of opportunity, because otherwise, like, you would try to use a chainsaw and they'd hit you, it'd be stupid. I personally just want to see more and more different small variations on stuff like this, because it means you get to pick what's going to be ideal for your deck. This is not universally good recursion. People like Tommy building Mega Becky decks, for instance, would never want this, even though it is recursion. It's putting it in your deck as opposed to your hand, which is unacceptable in the case of having to find Becky. But for stuff like just getting the most out of a chainsaw, yeah, this seems solid. I definitely like the idea of using the chainsaw, running out of fuel, using Act of Desperation and throwing it at somebody, then using Push to the Limit to dig it out of the gas, or out of the trash rather, magically with more gas this time, and shuffling it back in your deck. I just really enjoy the feel of Push to the Limit. My experience building these decks is that I feel like I have a bunch of jank cards that shouldn't be there, but I love these cards, and someday I'll get to play a terrible deck that runs all of them. Speaking of things I love, the artwork and thematic resonance on Longshot is like one of the best. It probably will be the best in the expansion. It's probably the best in the last several expansions. I love this. The Longshot is the idea of throwing a brick at a ghoul. Not just that, you may commit Longshot to a fight or evasion test against an enemy at your location or a connecting location. If it's successful, deal 1 damage to that enemy. The Longshot is throwing a brick down a hallway, or in the case of some maps, across a continent, while someone else is trying to break its ankles and somehow hitting the ghoul in that. I would definitely agree that's a Longshot. And it's a practice skill for all those survivor fighters running practice makes perfect. Stall for Time is a really cool card. I don't know that it's a good card in any capacity. It's a 1-cost event, parlay, choose an enemy at your location, test Brain X, where that's its either fight or evade value, whichever is lower. If you succeed, you exhaust them, but you don't disengage from them, which is a little bit weird. If it's non-elite, it does not ready during the next upkeep, and then if you fail, you get Stall for Time back. So, it's interesting. Is this parallel Ashcan Pete support? That's definitely Patrice in the picture. But this has, like, play pattern vibes for Ashcan Pete's parallel, doesn't it? So often, my opinion on cards like this is, couldn't we have solved the problem more directly? But to be fair, this is guaranteed to work at some point during the turn, testing in a skill that is traditionally not solving the problem. I don't personally like Stall for Time, but I think it's much better at the archetype of dodging things than many other dodge cards are. Still not a fan of it though. Wrong Place, Right Time is a very, very cool card. I don't know that I think it's good. It's a 0-cost event, commits for guts or manual decks, or 1 icon if you're desperate for a fist or a book. As an additional cost to play it, you spend an action, so it costs 2 actions. And for those 2 actions, you move up to 5 damage and horror from your investigator to assets controlled by investigators at your location. For each asset defeated by this effect, draw 1 card. Then you remove this card from the game. So for 2 actions, I would expect a 0-cost event to draw at least 3 cards. And I don't know that you can reliably expect to do that with only 5 damage and horror getting transferred. Additionally, you have to have already taken the damage. You need draw the most during setup before you've taken a bunch of damage and have a bunch of nearly dead assets. I look at Wrong Place, Right Time, and I have dreams of sick plays on Tommy. I know. It sounds cool. I don't think I'll ever play this card and be sad about it. What I think I'll be sad about is the tremendous amount of time this card is in my deck and hand doing nothing. I think if the top end were higher on this, it was more like move up to 8 damage. Like, sure, that's an outrageous amount of quote-unquote healing, but you're just killing soak assets. So unless you're in like a really direct damage-focused scenario, of which like none exists because the developers don't hit Calvin that much, it really doesn't feel like actual healing. It's a double action to do it. There are a lot of cards where you spend 2 actions healing, you can easily heal for a good chunk. This is a level 0 card, admittedly. It's just like, outside of Tommy, who really wants this? Because like, the problem is that you could have just used the soak originally, unless you're giving it to your teammates. But if you're giving it to your teammates, why'd you run this instead of leather coats or cherished keepsakes? Whichever one was killing you, you could have ran those instead, right? I just look at this and I don't understand what world this is for. Like, I can see the Tommy dreamland, but that's not realistic. And outside of that, I don't even know who really wants this instead of just, like, Survivor has 0 cost soak that directly solves this problem. And God, the idea of drawing by killing all of my assets in the late game just feels so gross. As a double action, I think if this were a single action, I'd be cynical on it. The double action with the fairly low maximum output, I don't like this card. This feels like a card that was printed by people who were terrified it could be oppressive, and they made damn sure it never was. That's how I feel about it. But for now, we're done. I love the art on Longshot. I think Sparrow Mask brings survivors fully from resistant to the mythos to laughing in the face of the mythos. I look at Hank and just feel a sense of deep confusion. No one should be this strong. I am looking at Red Mark Harrigan. Yeah, that actually just feels like an accurate assessment. If they printed Mark Harrigan or Tony Morgan today, I'd complain. I'd be like, what the fuck? This is the first character where I've ever got to have a first impression of it recorded. I felt this way about Daryl when he was released last expansion. I was like, oh, hey, yeah, that's 5 book with Seeker access, nice. And then they printed a whole ass archetype for him. If they do that for Hank, he's going to be very strong. Coincidentally, there is a hybrid healing spell that you can get. I guess you can't heal yourself once you have 4 head though, so you won't be good at using it. I think it's called Earthly Serenity, but it's probably not worth using. Is the Sparrow Mask only for treacheries? No, you can use the Sparrow Mask to use the healing spell. You don't have to die in your original Hank form, you could just hang out. I'm sure there's lots of jank things I can do with Hank. Hank's very good. This stat line is insane, the total soak is insane. I can only hope he has trash deck building, because deck building matters a lot, and I haven't mentioned that on him like I have with all the other investigators. If he has bad deck building, that can limit him pretty severely. Mono red is not the best at fighting. You really will need a little bit of support to get it. And things like Yorick's color, he's already got blue. Is there a green character? Yeah, Wendy's already got green. So the traditionally good fighting things that immediately come to mind will not be available, but there's tons of things they could give him that'll be insane at fighting. Hank is going to be the best investigator out of this expansion, and if he's not, I'm going to be very upset with whoever is. Finding out this was a 13-point stat line is upsetting to me. And I'm very, very interested in seeing what Ravenous Myconid it evolves into, because I have no idea. Absolutely not a guess. But that's all for now. I've been rather coherent. This has been my first impressions of the first wave of spoilers for the Feast of Hemlock Vale. And I would love to hear your opinions, especially if you disagree with me, down in the comments below. Thank you for watching, and see you in the next one. Which might be a while, because I am not going to be going back to Arkham content until I finish the XCOM campaign. There's probably at least a month of that left.